Welcome to week 3 in macroeconomics. I hope you're having a good start to the semester. Let's talk about our goals during week 3. The focus this week is on supply and demand. So this is the last week we talk about the basic models underlying economics. So we started in week 1 and 2 talking about the principles underlying economics. Week 2, we talked about some basic models of the production possibility curve and the circular flow model. This week, we're going to talk about another basic model called supply and demand. It's something that we intuitively know about, and I'm sure many of you know about it at a much more detailed level. But essentially, what goes on in almost every market is the idea of supply and demand setting the price and the quantity of goods or services available for a particular market. And this includes both the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries. So understanding supply and demand is crucial because it directly influences the cost of care, the accessibility of treatments, and the direction of research and development in the pharmaceutical industry. So let's take a look at some of the details around this topic. So let's talk a little bit about supply and demand. And I'm going to start by talking about drug prices in the United States. Drug prices in the United States are exceptionally high. And from a political perspective, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or any other branch of politics, everybody recognizes drug prices are too high, and everybody will tell you that they should be lower. So it's not really a political issue as much as it's a market issue. And the truth is that we as Americans pay much more for drugs than any other country. Some estimates are 3 times more for key drugs. So it's important for us to recognize that that when the markets are competitive, then prices tend to hover around cost. But when suppliers have market power, as they do in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, then they tend to be much higher than the free and competitive market would set. So the other thing that goes on in the U.S. healthcare system or the U.S. pharmaceutical industry, is that the United States is one of the few countries that allows drug companies to set prices. And the rationale is that encourages research and development. So up until recently, in fact, even as of today, Medicare does not negotiate prices. They've put 10 drugs on the table for enactment in 2026 for negotiating prices. But this is all part of the market power that the pharmaceutical has in the United States. And their rationale for doing it is pretty clear, that they argue that this encourages and enables research and development. Whether that's true or not is beyond the scope of this course. But let's keep in mind that when we talk about Chapter 3, supply and demand, there's an assumption that we're in a competitive marketplace. And for the most part, the U.S. healthcare industry and the U.S. Pharmaceutical industry are not competitive marketplaces. And so suppliers have a lot more control and influence over pricing than they would if it were a normal and competitive market. Okay, so I just want to set that backdrop, and then we're going to go and look at the basics of supply and demand. So when we talk about supply and demand, we're going to start with the demand curve. So demand curves typically look like this. They're downward sloping to the right. And what this says, for a normal good, the lower the price, the more demand there will be. So here's the price on the y-axis, and here's the demand on the x-axis. And you see as price comes down, there's more quantity demanded. So that's the classic definition of demand. As price falls, the quantity demand rises. Okay, so that's that is fundamentally true for most products or services. So sometimes we actually see a shift of the demand curve. It can be either to the right or to the left. And the shift happens for one of 5 reasons. So certainly when price changes, we expect some movement along the demand curve. Okay, that's a fundamental given, for almost any product. But sometimes the demand may shift to the right or to the left, which means that if it shifts to the right, there's more quantity demanded at every price point. And if it shifts to the left, then there's less quantity demanded at every price point. And so economists believe there are 5 fundamental reasons why that might happen. So there could be a change in prices of related goods or services. So for example, hot dogs and hot dog buns. The price of hot dogs goes up, then the demand for hot dog buns is going to fall. Right? And our changes in income. As incomes go up, demand curve shifts to the right. If we're in a recession, incomes go down, demand curve shifts to the left. There can also be a change in tastes, right? So we learn something is healthy or not healthy. We just have some cultural changes in terms of what we want or don't want, and that can cause demand curves to shift to the left or the right. And then expectations about future outcomes, and also the number of consumers. So demand, while it's downward shifting to the right, that we know that it can shift in either direction based on these factors. And supply works much like demand, except it's the mirror image, right? The higher the price, the more supply is willing to come to the market to bring their services or their goods, right? And the lower the price, the fewer suppliers. Okay, and again, we can see a shift of the supply curve to the right or to the left based on a few factors, which I'll show you. So the cost of producing the goods or services can shift it to the right or the left. Price of related goods or services. So if I'm building automobiles and the price of electric batteries goes up significantly, that's going to raise my cost and shift the supply to the left. Technological improvements can really change the paradigm. And then expectations about things like inflation, number of producers, et cetera, can all cause shifts to the right or the left. And so when all is said and done with supply and demand, we reach something called equilibrium. So equilibrium is where the supply and demand curves intersect. So in a free market, these are the willing, so if you start at the top of the demand curve and come all the way down to the intersection point here, these are all consumers coming into the market freely. And when you look at the supply curve, you start at the bottom of the supply curve, move all the way up to the intersection, the equilibrium point. These are all suppliers willing to come into the market. And this is what the market sets as the price. Sometimes we have shortages or surpluses. We have a shortage if the demand exceeds the supply. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's government intervention. Sometimes there are suppliers who get control of the supply chain issues like we saw during COVID. And sometimes we can have a surplus. And when we have a shortage, what we should expect is that typically prices go up. And we can have a surplus as well. And that's when the opposite would happen. That's when the supply exceeds the demand. And we see that when supply is oversupply, or there's a change in consumer preferences. In that case, prices fall, suppliers leave the market, and so forth. Okay, so those are the fundamental things that I want to talk about. So let me go back and just talk a little bit about week 3. So in week 3, I want you to go through the learning materials that I've posted, the lecture materials, supply and demand videos, play the Kahoot game, do the graded assignments, and then do the weekly discussion. And if you want to earn some extra points on the next quiz, which will be on chapters 3 and chapter 6, then you can post some questions here. The other thing I want to remind you is that quiz number 1 has been posted in the week 2 folder. So if you haven't already taken that, please make sure you take quiz 1. Okay, and of course, any questions, I'm happy to meet with you. You email me, I'll answer your emails. If you want to meet in person, my office is White 322, or I'm happy to meet on Zoom. So look forward to your continuing contributions, and hope you have a great week.